Welcome to the Mastering Fulfillment podcast, where we focus on bridging your success with fulfillment in your personal, business, and spiritual life. And now your hosts, Scott Berry and Joshua Wenner.
Okay, and welcome back to the next episode of the Mastering Fulfillment podcast. I am so excited to have a dear friend, Shannon Hall. We've been talking about this for quite a while and talking off and on about doing some collaboration, and just really excited to have her on the podcast today. Dr. Hall is a tech scientist. She has expertise in leadership and in team performance. She's been leveraging about 10 years of experience researching, training, and consulting with multiple startups, I believe here in San Francisco and also the Bay Area, and I think other areas as well. She owns and runs a company called Epic Teams. I'll let her get a little bit more into what exactly that entails, but she's really been focusing on positive psychology. She's a positive psychology coach, and I'm going to kind of hand it off to Shannon and let her explain a little bit about her background and a little bit more about what Epic Teams actually does. And one other thing, one of the reasons that we're so excited to bring Shannon into this realm is the topic that we're constantly focusing on is fulfillment, and that's fulfillment in your personal, your social, your business, and your spiritual life. And a big part of our fulfillment is the work that we do. And whether you're an entrepreneur, whether you are in a team, whether you work for somebody else, that team dynamics, whether you're a team leader, whether you're a team member, that the fulfillment side of the people that you're constantly interacting with, especially for people who are working 8, 9, 10 hours a day, sometimes in teams, has a huge impact on your fulfillment. And so we're excited and so happy to have Dr. Hall on the program with us. So welcome.
Thank you. And thank you for that intro. Great to be here. I have a big smile on my face because I get to do a podcast with a dear friend of mine and meet a new friend. And hi, Scott. And so just a little bit more about me. I'm a sociologist by training. And so I've always been fascinated with what enables groups and teams to do their best possible work together. And I'm particularly motivated by groups and teams that are working towards what I call an extraordinary mission. And so a lot of my own passion and fulfillment comes through furthering groups that are really pushing the boundary on what is possible for humanity. So have kind of a social entrepreneurship streak within me, and have spent a lot of my own research looking at social movements across continents, across eras, and have been always curious about how social change actually happens. And so what I've discovered along the way is that even when you have rock star leaders and funding from incredible sources and really smart individuals that are part of your company, it does not mean that you are going to succeed. And what really makes or breaks a company is its ability to harness the collective talent to and really to shift what it means to be a leader, which is, in my mind, all about actualizing self and others towards an extraordinary mission.
Awesome. That's fantastic. Thank you for that. I've got so many questions. I have so much curiosity in this department. And as you know, I own another company, and I have run about 2 or 3 other companies. A few of them have failed, a couple of them have succeeded, but always trying to really figure out what is the X factor that helps key performing employees, especially in the group dynamic, actually be able to take that, really take that performance to the next level. I have a really quick question for you. What would you define as kind of a successful group dynamic in terms of leaders and in terms of team members? One specific question that I have on that is, what do you see in terms of the delegation of power in a team environment? You said, to really help self-actualize like all the team members. Now, do you feel that there should be a necessary balance of power, that everyone should maybe have equal say, but there should be one leader, meaning there should actually be more power on one person than the other, but they all have, I guess, equal voice? Or do you feel it's kind of like the Zappos model, where there's no key management and everyone's just kind of like spread on a very horizontal level?
So I'm glad you brought up Zappos and holacracy, because I think that's a really interesting example of distributed leadership to an extreme. And so if you can think about, on one side of the spectrum, you have, I'll just call it like completely flat distributed leadership. Everyone is empowered equally. And then the other extreme, you have your typical command and control, very regimented top-down type of culture. And what I find is that there is a kind of, I don't want to call it happy medium, because I think I lean a little bit more on distributed leadership and then the command and control end. But at the end of the day, you want people to feel like they can execute in a way that feels empowering, but that also takes into consideration the intelligence of all the people that are at the table that are tasked with solving a particular problem. So a team is going to lose out if they delegate all of the decision-making and all of the creative problem solving to one person, aka your manager. And on the other hand, if everyone is equally empowered, you could get into some groupthink, you could get into some analysis paralysis, you could kind of come to a standstill. And so you need some good dynamics in place and a good awareness of knowing when that distributed leadership model and practice is empowering and when it's time for a more directive approach.
Yeah, I love that, Shannon. And from my perspective, I've been in so many roles. I've been in some where I'm actually on the team as call it a team player, in the team player role. I've had a number of positions where I was more driving the team, so more in a management role. Mm-hmm. And also in a founder role, I'm at now in a couple roles. And then I've also seen it from like the consultant role, where going in to help position teams to be empowering. So I guess I'm curious, there's so many angles to fulfillment in teams. And I'm curious, what would be your definition when we're exploring fulfillment and what that looks like? And I know that the viewers that listen to our podcast are both a mixture of more entrepreneurial as well as those that do work for companies. Mm-hmm. And so just curious your perspective on what you think the definition of fulfillment would be in the workplace, let's call it, or in a team environment, from maybe a couple different viewpoints, like maybe from the team perspective or the a team member perspective, and how they unite together. Mm-hmm.
Cool. Okay. So I haven't used too much this term specifically of fulfillment, but one term that I use more often is performance. So when I think about a high-performing team, when I look at the research around a high-performing team, that is a team that is meeting the needs of its stakeholders, that is rocking it out on all of its goals, that's thinking strategically about where it can add the most value, and has good systems in place for making that happen. So there's that component. Then the other component is that they're continuously learning and growing. So they're continuously asking themselves, how committed are we to this work? So I think that's where some of the fulfillment comes into it. Like how much is this work taking advantage of our strengths and our talents and our skills? I look at how collaborative is the team? How well are they taking advantage of the collective expertise in the room. And then I look at how productive is that team. So are they finding those levers where they can channel their energies in a way that enables them to move forward without totally burning out? And then the last part I look at is how innovative is the team? Like, how attuned are they to the fact that we live in a world where we need to move very fast. At the same time, we are resource constrained and we need to create a big impact. So given those constraints, what are some of the most creative ways that we can think of about moving forward?
I like your definition on that, Shannon, because you're right. There's a few different ways to look at, I guess, the metrics, which is, I guess, a quantitative and then a non-quantitative aspect of being in a team, and having the actual performance indicators, the KPIs, all of that stuff. And then, I guess a little more tied to the fulfillment side is, I guess, checking in also with the team members on how many of them are actually enjoying being with the team, how many of them actually look forward to engaging with the team. And I would imagine the ones who are happy, the ones who actually feel like it's a team, it's a family, it's a kind of a cohesive unit, I would imagine, for, again, not always, but I would imagine that they probably perform a little bit better. I guess sometimes you can get, team members that have a good time, but tend to slack off a little bit. But, I've been in teams myself where, we have been performing, and the highest teams I think I've been, I enjoy the people I work with. I feel like everyone's on the same page. We're all kind of like moving, growing, learning together. But I sense that there is a family aspect, as opposed to some other teams I've been on where I feel like the only piece of glue that holds us together is the fact that our names are on this little sheet that says we're supposed to be working together, and we get through almost like the bare minimum just to get this done. And afterwards, I couldn't care less about continuing the relationship with these people, or I'm almost feel like I'm doing the bare minimum because I'm not actually enjoying some of the other dynamics that kind of goes with a group. Yeah.
Camaraderie is a big part of performance on a team, and unfortunately, it's one of those things that most teams think happen on its own, and so it's not something that they need to be intentional about. And when they are intentional about it, they oftentimes think that means, okay, well, let's go to a bar together, or let's go do a round of miniature golf. And I mean, those things are fun, and they do help to create social bonds to a certain extent, as long as everyone on the team enjoys drinking or enjoys miniature golf, or whatever activity it is that you happen to do. But I found that deeper sense of camaraderie happens when you create an environment for the people on the team to be vulnerable with each other and to have that deeper conversation and that level of self-awareness around, hey, what are our creative tendencies? What are our reactive tendencies? How are our reactive tendencies interfering with the way we do work together? Let's talk about that. And when you see your coworkers as people that you can actually be real with, that's a much deeper level of camaraderie that really separates subpar teams from high-performing teams, I found.
I love it. I absolutely love this conversation. I'm doing that in some spaces, exploring with a couple teams right now, really getting to the radical raw vulnerability of conflict. And I'm finding as we undress it, if you will, it builds such deep connection and a sense of family, which is interesting. But I had a question come up when you were saying that. I have a couple good friends that worked within different Danaher companies. And Danaher is so good at their business model on execution. And they have stretch goals and they have high performance goals, and they really do a great job. However, a common challenge I've heard is burnout. And I'm curious your perspective on, how do you curb that? If you get a team that's unified, that feels like a sense of family, that's connected, that's hitting their indicators, that's stretching, and all the factors. How do you create an environment for fulfillment without the burnout? What's your perspective on that?
Yeah. What's really interesting about that is the research shows that people burn out not because they have a lot of work that they need to do, but when they have a lot of work that they're not actually learning and growing from. And so, if you look at me, I love what I do, and I wake up early and I get to work, and sometimes I'm reading, until late at night. And I'm not burnt out because I'm just so enthralled by what it is that I'm learning and what I'm doing. And if you take those same hours and you're tasked with doing something that is just not fulfilling, then that's not sustainable, and stress levels are going to increase, and all the other health and mental side effects of that are going to increase. So when I work with leaders, one of the things that I encourage them to do is to do their own self-check and really get clear on hey, is this work meaningful to me? Am I growing from it? Is it using my strengths? Do I feel challenged? And then take those same questions and regularly ask your direct reports, at least on a quarterly basis, if not monthly, because that's how you're going to avoid the burnout. So that's what I would say about that.
Yeah, I love that. I think it's something that Josh and I talk about all the time is, growth is life. And when you're being pulled by inspired action versus pushing through something just because it has to get done, there is a higher level of fulfillment, but there's also a lot lower level of burnout. So here's an interesting question on kind of tagging on to what you and actually Josh just talked about in the realm of creating a space to where there's trust and safety and vulnerability, to where you feel like, this is my family, right? This is kind of my high-performing team family that we're going to conquer whatever this task is or this project or whatever it happens to be.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things that I've been discovering is I used to be heavy focused in sales and marketing, and in order to grow a business. And as I got more into looking at acquisitions or positioning for acquisition, and a lot more of kind of the investor hat on, and realizing how the business operates. And I've been much more focused on maximizing human potential, or I guess you could call it ROI, on individuals. So instead of as big of a marketing or sales budget, if you will, how do you maximize the team in order to produce, run more efficiently? So I'm curious, tying that into this from a leader perspective. Maybe there's an entrepreneur or somebody listening to this that has struggled a little bit with heavy budgets on sales and marketing, continuing to try to grow year over year, kind of pushing, if you will. And I'm curious your perspective on, as a team member, if they're able to adapt into a process like what you're doing, creating new experiences to work together for a sense of empowerment, what your experience is that has been on the bottom line, meaning as a team member feels inspired to work and to contribute and to take ownership and to feel a sense of fulfillment on their team, how that affects the bottom line in revenue. So just curious around that, like what's the end goal? If people are doing this and they feel fulfilled, how have you seen that affect the business overall?
Yeah, great question. I'm so curious to learn more about the work that you do as well. So the research shows that if you do team development work independent of performance metrics, it's just not as effective. There's just not enough skin in the game. You'll have people who, will at the end of the day, we're happier together, or we're getting along great. But ultimately, this is a time and energy investment for a company, and it needs to have a return. And so whenever I do this work with teams, we get really clear before we even start, what is an extraordinary goal that this team desires to achieve that they maybe have not even considered before? What is the thing that they would really love to say, wow, that was truly an epic win. And I'm so glad that we did this. And we would not have been able to do this if we did not up our game together. And so we developed some metrics around that. And those are metrics that we track month over month to see where we are. And once we get clear on what is that performance dimension, then we look at, okay, what are the critical few behaviors that are going to be necessary for us to hit that goal? And how well are we doing on those behaviors? And, and then we'd have like a series of checkpoints where we're consistently adjusting and iterating and running basically these little micro experiments, if you will, to see how close can we get to hitting that end goal. And we'll run some metrics around that as well. And and then at the end, we'll assess where we are. And of course, this is a journey. So even if we've seen maybe not as much as we would have initially liked to, we stop and ask ourselves, okay, so what do we need to do to get to where we want to go? And so the team develops the skills and tools to do that work on their own by the time we are done working together. So I transfer everything that I do to the team, so that way they just own their learning and development moving forward.
That's great. That's great. I had another question around that too. Is there a typical size team? Just so anybody that's listening and relating to this, because one of my questions I had is, I do a lot with smaller teams where it's like more of an owner that's wanting to move away from an owner operator to empower the team to drive the business. It seems like my experience is that before I could get the team, I had to work with the owner to get them clear on it first. Are your teams, what are the typical size that you're working in? Because you said you go right into the teams. I'm curious. So I guess two questions. One, what size teams do you typically work with? And two, do you have to sit down with the founder and really get clear on the outcomes or the mission or the vision before you work with the team? Or is it, I guess those are my two questions.
I'd like to tack on one too, is there an optimal size of a team that you feel works best between this number and this number? And if it gets too big, do you maybe kind of like cut them in half? Really curious to get your feedback on that.
Yeah. And it's interesting because I think a lot of times we use the term team kind of interchangeably between team and organization. And I just wanted to get clear, when you say team, you actually mean like a team, not the org.
Yeah, that's what I think that's the context I was using it in. Were you using it in as team meaning the organization?
No, I mean the team. Team size is key. And the research shows that usually the larger the team, the more ineffective it can be. I'm sure you're familiar with the 2 pizza rule.
Yeah.
And so, but I work like most of the teams I work with are between 7 and 12. But in a lot of these, fast growing tech companies, when we do this work together, oftentimes we'll, and because we also have really fast growing teams, sometimes, there's a sales team that I started working with 5 months ago, and they were 10 people. And at the end of the 5 months, they had exploded to 40 people. So we ended up creating 3 separate sessions for each of those members. And I have another team that's 16 engineers. Now they have smaller project teams, but we meet with all the project teams together. I'd say 16 is really pushing it in terms of the level of intimacy that is necessary when you do this work. And so I don't work usually with more than 16 people in a room.
Great. And then, just for anybody that's listening that hasn't heard of the 2 pizza rule, I know it was initially from Jeff Bezos. Is that correct? And just kind of where, I know he initially, I guess, what's your perspective on the 2 pizza rule and how that would apply? Just so anybody listening that's like 2 pizzas.
This is a work that has also been confirmed by Richard Hackman, who's passed now, but has been a leading team performance scholar, the author of the book Leading Teams. So 2 pizza rule, basically, you're looking at like 8 people, right? So it's the number of people that 2 American pizzas can feed. So that's where that comes from.
The person that's thinking of, is this more in team meetings? Or just for context, somebody listening going, oh, if every time they have a meeting, they have 20 people in a room, or if they have 2 people in a room, it's the ideal 2 pizzas. What can 2 pizzas feed as the ideal team size to meet and get things done? Is that how you would define that?
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay, cool. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Awesome. And then I guess one other question I had with that was, do you sit down with the founder first and like, I guess whoever brings you on to hire to get the objectives in place? Like, do you do a SWOT analysis or do you do anything high level, or do you already go in kind of knowing here's the objective, or is it purely created while you're sitting down with the team from day one?
Yeah, it really depends on the size of the organization as well. Sometimes I work with organizations that are early stage, either like seed funding or Series A, and the team leader is the CEO.
Yep.
And there's that level of being synced up in terms of what the org needs and what the team needs. And then anything larger than, basically any organization larger than one team where there's multiple teams involved, it's super key to get the CEO on board and to have the CEO really own the endeavor and initiative. And you definitely need every team leader to be invested in the initiative, because if you don't have that, it just doesn't work.
I love that, because that was one of the biggest challenges that I saw, is coming in and feeling like so much progress is made, and then the leaders not following what's being set as a standard, and then everybody resorts back to following the leader. And so that's what I was curious of. How do you know? It sounds like finding the teams where the leader's open to be vulnerable, the leader's open to be transparent, the leader's open to do the same work that they're expecting their team to do. Is the best possible environment, because they're vulnerable, they're owning it, they're embracing it, and so it gives everybody else permission to do the same. Is that really what you?
Yeah.
That's my question. If it was validated on large teams as well as on small teams, of doing that together.
Yeah, it is. And even I've had times when I've been working with leaders, and I could tell they just weren't really as invested, but they were kind of going through the motions. And I thought, okay, well, maybe they'll come around. And in the end, those are the teams that end up just not performing as well as when the leader is just like, let's fucking do this already and make it happen.
So tacking onto that, what would you say as you first kind of come in contact to, I guess, management, or if it's a smaller company, the owner, CEO, and they may not be as vested as, maybe doing the work themselves, but they have a direction and they have kind of an idea. I'm going to bring in epic teams. I'm going to bring Shannon in to really tune up this team and really get it to the next level. Once you get there, you start to evaluate his vision is different than maybe your vision. Maybe he's thinking, I want you to really work on, I don't know, I'm just kind of throwing it out there, this specific sales and marketing side, or we need this type of, and we need to get more together on our mission statement for the company, and then we'll move up together. And you're thinking, no, there's a trust factor here. Before we can do anything else, we need to tackle A or B or C, and it's at odds to the owner or whoever that maybe kind of brought you on. Have you seen that? And if you have, how have you dealt with that before?
Yeah. So I'm a big fan of Peter Hawkins' work, and he's put forth this model of systemic team coaching. And the basic premise of systemic team coaching is that a team's value is in its ability to create products or services that meet the needs of its stakeholders. And so at that point, it's not, of course, the manager's perspective is important about what the team needs to focus on. And of course, what the team thinks it needs to focus on is important. However, you're going to get much more valuable input if you ask the stakeholders of the team, from your perspective, how is the team meeting your needs? What does it need to do to step up? And so it's this outside in perspective, and then it's a forward back perspective. So we ask, okay, let's fast forward a year from now or 6 months from now or even 3 months from now. Like, what is it that this team's stakeholders need from you, and how are we going to get there? And so establishing that baseline makes a huge difference, because if a team is just very internally oriented, they might miss a lot. That doesn't. They're, especially in today's day and age where we need to be attuned to the competitive landscape, and we need to be attuned to all the different forces that are at play. And if we're not, we are going to get dusted. So at that point, when you bring that information in and you orient the manager and the team around that information, it's just a different conversation.
And as you were talking, I had something come up, and it was a challenge that I had in one of my own companies, and then I've seen this as well. How do you find that right balance with? It's almost like what you want to. I think as your business starts doing well, you want to give to your team, and there's the joy from an owner perspective in giving to the team. And I guess it depends on the owner and their mindset, but I found there's also a limit. I had a company where I was giving so much, and then I felt a sense of entitlement, which, and then I've noticed a couple other clients, and it's the same kind of energy where, how do you find that balance between doing a good job where you're fulfilled, you're growing, you're learning, you're compensated well, but not, I think there's a whole conversation about overcompensation. Yeah. There's a lot of companies that are doing so much now. It's just a really interesting conversation around, what's that balance? So I'm curious, and again, our conversation is focused around fulfillment. So it's like, in order to be fulfilled, where do you find that balance comes from between, I guess, so to find my question, for fulfillment, what's the balance between, I guess, growth and compensation monetarily for the teams on the results? And where does it get into trouble, right? Where does it get into trouble where, oh man, I've given them so much and we didn't get the result, or there's, I don't know what that energy of entitlement comes from. Yeah. Just curious your perspective on that.
Yeah, I'm curious more about the specific situation that you're talking about. When you said I'm giving so much, do you mean like comp or energy, or like, can you tell me a little bit more about the specific situation you're referring to?
Yeah, I'm thinking of one recently where they were bonusing and the team kept asking for more. So it's almost like they would create a bonus structure, and then the team would say, well, I need more, and I need more, and I need more. And they're feeling like, well, I keep creating bonus structures. And then the owner was feeling like, I'm giving so much already, and it's never enough. So almost like a challenge with feeling like, man, I'm giving and giving and giving, and it's always more. So then they start to have almost judgment from the team of an entitlement, because they're like, I already bonused. And then the irony is when I get in under the hood with some of them, the bonuses weren't even built around stretch goals, right? Some of them around baseline. There's not even any growth tied to it. So it just gets a little bit interesting. So I'm just curious, again, when navigating that situation where there's an owner that wants to give to their team, and a lot of them do it through financial means. Is it that it maybe wasn't financial means and the team's not growing as an individual, and so that they move to financial when they don't feel a sense of growth or fulfillment? And again, it may not be a known. It just may be an interesting conversation, but I do see it surface sometimes amongst different owners and get a little confused on it.
That is really bad. Are you talking about with a sales team?
This one was a doctor's office, like a dental practice, and incentivizing the team on bonuses to hit certain goals. And how, again, when you have, it's also tricky when there's people that aren't compensated through it, but then they want to incentivize the team. If we work together as a team and hit this goal, then everybody should win. We all win together. So how do we win as a team and everybody gets compensated? And then there was like almost like anger and fighting. It just was interesting, right? Of how the structure was set up and where sometimes it can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah, that is super tricky. I mean, so much of this work is contextual, so that's why I'm just like, let's dig a little bit more. We said, who was it, like front office, or was it actually like the clinicians who are getting the bonuses? I just wanted to know a little bit more. Yeah,
so I guess when I did a lot of deep work and this is one of the clients that I actually talked about it all and got to the surface, I found there was conflict issues and people didn't feel safe in the office. And so it was more of a self-protection. And when they weren't fulfilled at their job, they didn't feel safe at their job. Even though it was a great team, they're actually high-performing from the outside. But the inside, there was some conflict. And in turn, they were trying to overcompensate with money to justify it. So it was my observation. Again, it was more of an observation of, wow, they're not fulfilled here. They don't feel safe. They don't feel fulfilled. So in order to justify it, they think they need more money to justify it. So the problem isn't giving them more money, which is what he kept doing. Oh, let me give you more. Let me give you more. It's never enough. And I felt like the problem was, let's all come to the table and be vulnerable and talk about the conflict, and let's resolve the conflict and see where they're going to come from. So I didn't know if that was a very individual perspective or if it's a common thing where, because I see it kind of one or the other. They're either overly generous and kind of get taken advantage of, even I've seen at times, or other times they don't give enough and teams are crushing it and they don't compensate them when they're doing it. So again, it's just an interesting, I had questions around it. And maybe it's not maybe it's not a generalized thing. It's an individual case by case.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that is super fascinating. Especially when, like you said, so if people are checked out, if they feel like, this is just a paycheck, then giving them those additional bonuses seemed like that's interesting that the owner saw that as his primary recourse, which I think probably contributed more to the problem. I'm guessing. As you said, it sounded like there was some infighting that happened, as a result of continuing to give those bonuses, and it wasn't like output was increasing. That's definitely, I think, an example of kind of perverse incentives. On the other hand, when you look at organizations that are creating cultures of performance and growth, that factors like comp and benefits are really what are called hygiene factors. So, it doesn't really determine whether people stay or go. It's helpful for keeping people there. And of course, incremental bumps are always welcome, but if people feel like they are learning and growing, and as long as they have a decent amount of comp and benefits, they're going to stay. And throwing money at them actually can sometimes, from what we know from human behavior, take things in a different direction.
Josh, this reminds me, and I don't know if we've actually mentioned this on the podcast before, but it was a story that you told me, and I don't know if maybe you wanted to maybe elaborate on this a little bit, but it was one of your past experiences where I know that you were in a high performing team, and I know that your specific role was, I think it was biz dev, and you were really kicking ass and making your numbers, and you were getting compensated financially on a very high level, but it wasn't necessarily what you were ultimately wanting. And yes, you want to get paid for what you're worth, but I think there was a higher kind of desire, if you will, of wanting, I guess, some partnership or equity or something else, and I guess all the money wouldn't have actually made you more fulfilled in that aspect. And it sounded like there was a little bit of a kind of a disconnect of, where the owners were and really what you were wanting.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. There's another example of when I was on an actual team and contributing on a revenue standpoint and actually generating about a third of the revenue for the company. And the irony was what threw me over the edge. Part of it was the partnership, but it's so funny what you're talking about, Shannon, because I'm such a personal development junkie. I saw where there was the team was growing so fast. In this particular case, the founder was still running kind of the old school authoritative leadership style, where he used fear, and people would come to him and they wouldn't confront him. I was very confrontational and spoke my mind. And so in order to get the team united, because people were leaving, I started putting together personal development events to add value to help the team grow. Said, they're lacking growth, and he canceled all of them. So I was doing it just as a value add, and he went in and canceled all of them and said no, and overrid him. And that to me was what made me leave. It wasn't the actual. The other factors were at play, but that was the part where it's like, wow, hey, I'm doing this because I care about these people, and I want them to have better lives. And on my own time, designing my own curriculums to add value, to have them actually believe the mission of this company. Like I saw what was going on. So, but I think that's one of the things I've observed, and I got it from a guy that was a big turnaround guy. And he said he would come into companies, and he said one of the biggest problems was ego. And, from the top down, where these people get into organizations and they push people down and kind of sit on their job, and they're threatened from people people that could really drive the mission forward and really drive things forward. So he comes in, takes over a company, and he immediately interviews everybody, gets the mission going and getting excited. And then he goes and looks for the people that are holding people down and cuts them, and then just empowers the team. And the team really takes that mission and runs with it. And so I guess the reason I'm sharing it is I think what you're doing is so valuable. And I think if more owners and team members realize what would happen if they loved what they did, if they came into the office, let's call it, most of our time spent at work. And if you come in and you love what you do and you feel inspired and you add value and you can grow and you have a voice, I think that's another big piece of it. It's inspiring what can happen with an organization. I find the owner can kind of step aside and focus on the vision. But I guess a question for that is, what's a way that you take, or I'm curious, how do you take that vision and help people embody that? Right? Or what is anything that you can, if there is an owner listening just from this podcast alone, is there any takeaways that they can take and implement in right now of like, man, if I just sat down with my team and had a transparent conversation, is it, and talking about things and bringing it into the light? Is it anything you could recommend is starting to move in this direction to like be open to a company like yours to come into theirs?
Well, one, just shifting the mindset that we can become a team committed to learning and growing and getting better over time. I think that's huge. And even just that shift in the mindset creates ripple effects in how you interact with your people. And so I would say, one, just, recognizing that we are all on a journey, and you may not be working together with this specific group of people for the rest of your life, but while you are together, let's make the most of it and really see where we can help, identify where our blind spots are and come about it in a way that feels encouraging and empowering. So that's just something right off the bat that I've discovered. It's just recognizing that you don't have to control everything, that your people actually are capable of way more than you think. And by just asking the right questions, I'm a big fan of, grow coaching. So I use the grow model a lot in my work with managers. Super, super, super simple, grow acronym, like G, what's your goal? What's your aim in the situation? R, reality, where are you now? What have you tried? What worked? What didn't work? O is for obstacles, like what obstacles are in your way? Options, what options could you try? And then just keep asking what else? You're building those new neural pathways and you're helping people find their own solutions. And then that W is just, what are you willing to commit to? And how can I hold you accountable? and you're asking people to identify, like, what is the one thing that you know is going to make the biggest difference in your performance. And rather than me saying, okay, so I'm going to check up on you on X day in this way, you just ask them, how would you like me to hold you accountable? And they will tell you, you know? So just a super simple technique, but makes a world of difference. And that's just a great starting point.
Yeah, I love that. I was just about to ask that same question, Josh, for, entrepreneurs that maybe have a small team just starting out that don't quite have the resources to to bring Shannon in to help sharpen their team. These are great tips. And I really love what you said. How do you, I think a lot of this comes back to empowerment. How do you really empower them and ask them, okay, so what would you need and how can I help keep you accountable? And I think that also makes them feel also engaged. I'd like to not get too nitty gritty, but I'd like to maybe get some feedback from you on maybe some tips and tricks on, accountability, KPIs, things that, kind of keep the team on point. Do you have any suggestions on maybe what are some good metrics to possibly look at? How often should the teams be getting together? Is there kind of a sweet spot or not a sweet spot? Is there too much interaction with the teams, right? Is there too many, I'm sure this has come up. Can you have too many meetings in a day? Obviously I think that's a pretty obvious answer, but do you have any tips as far as, little logistics, KPIs, things of that nature?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it just depends on the function of the team. I've found that each, marketing KPIs are some pretty, versus engineering or sales, customer service. There are some pretty standard KPIs for each function that I think every manager should just be aware of. And, and then I also think it's important to look at not just performance metrics, but also some sort of engagement metrics. And so, by either, there are a few engagement platforms out there for running surveys periodically, or, it could be as simple as just bringing the team together and say, like, what are the behaviors of engagement and commitment that we want to exemplify ourselves? And then let's just do a pulse, like red, yellow, green. Where are we on this behavior? And then just checking again, 3 months or 6 months. You can run your own form of that, your own internal engagement metrics that are good to track over time.
Yeah, that's great.
Just to give a quick experience share, I've been in the Entrepreneurs Association with a couple of my businesses the last few years, and one of the biggest takeaways that I've gotten from that, and that really made a huge difference in not only my own company, but what I've also seen in some of my forum members and whatnot, is the morning huddle. And how powerful that is. And for those of you who don't know what that is, it is a really quick 5 to 10 minutes max. And you basically get in a huddle, you stand up, you're engaged, but it's the first thing in the morning. And it's a quick check-in on what's going on, what were some of your challenges, what do you have going on, what could you have help with. It's not a time to go deep on any of those issues, but just to say, hey, here's kind of what's going on. You can hear what's going on around you. And I can tell you as a business owner, it really helps to just quickly check in to see what's going on in the room. Obviously, the huddles kind of work at a certain size, and then once they get too big, then you kind of cut it up. But doing that every single morning, max 5, 10, 15 minutes at the absolute max, really helps. I mean, it just jump starts the entire day and gives a really kind of great overview on kind of like what's going on, and it helps you kind of like navigate. And it also helps other team members to help other team members when they kind of voice and hear what's going on. So I found that immensely helpful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely.
Hey, Shannon, I was curious if somebody's on a team right now, because we talked about the owner. If they're on a team, is there anything they can do? Like maybe they're sitting there listening, going, "I wish I had this team. I wish my team was doing these things," and they're not. Is there anything that somebody can do to empower themselves or to bring this conversation to their owner, or any recommendations for somebody on a team either to be more fulfilled with what they can manage or how to bring this conversation up? Any suggestions that way?
Yeah. I mean, one thing that comes to mind is, at the end of the day, what are we talking about? We're just talking about about improvements and learning. And so, it could be as simple as, it's so funny because it actually is very simple to just stop and reflect. And it doesn't take very long, even if it's just, I recommend at least an hour a month. At least one meeting per month is a time where we just ask ourselves, what's working, what's not working, what do we want to do differently? And so as a team member, maybe even just bringing it up to the team and saying, hey, I'd like to suggest that we pause for a moment. I'm sure we're all, hitting the ground running since it's 2018 and everyone's, really focused now on tasks at hand. But before we do that, maybe we should just reflect on how do we think we did, not just from a performance standpoint, but how do we think we're doing from a collaboration standpoint, from a productivity standpoint, and even just having that forum where you say, what's working, what's not working, what do we want to do differently, what do we want to commit to moving forward, how are we going to hold ourselves accountable to that, when do we want to check in again, and how are we going to know that things changed? So that's what I can offer for any person who's a part of a team. Just bring it up to the team, bring it up to your manager. And if you do that, I guarantee your manager is going to be very freaking impressed, especially if you volunteer to be a facilitator for that conversation. So that's a little nugget that could be helpful for the listeners.
That's awesome. That's really cool. And then I just had two questions for you. One of them is, you've mentioned some really good resources, and it sounds like you've done a lot of study around teams, different theories, and any just either recommendations on books, or if somebody's just loving this conversation, going super interesting, what resources would be really helpful that you find have, because it sounds like in your research, what's helped sculpt your perspective, and you think would be, because there's some that's outdated sometimes. Yeah. And some things are good at looking at multiple perspectives, saying, oh, these are all relevant. They all apply in different circumstances. And sometimes it's like, oh, this stuff's super outdated. It doesn't work anymore. So just curious on resources.
Sure. So a couple of things that come to mind. One is a book called Committed Teams, and that recently came out last year. And I think that it has a really great toolkit for managers. It brings together all the relevant research on teams and presents it in a very simple and actionable way. And that book came out of a couple of researchers, practitioners at Wharton. And then one book that I recommend for all my managers is Helping People Win at Work by Ken Blanchard. And it's all about the don't mark my paper, help me get an A philosophy. So really, really great coaching questions in there for managers. And then there's a classic that is one of those where I've read snippets here and there, and I've always known that I should read it, but I've just never really got around to it. And my uncle recommended it to me over the holidays, and so I ordered it, and wow, mind blown. Peter Senge's The Fifth Discipline.
That's excellent. Thank you. Thanks for sharing those. And so just other, and this is more of a fun question. This is more, our podcast is called Mastering Fulfillment, and there's obviously resonance with you to be on it with us. And Just curious, one thing in your life that's brought you more fulfillment. It could be from a personal level. It could be from a professional level. Just if you go ahead if you need a second to really reflect on it. But it's like, what's something that you do or that you've discovered or that you have figured out in your life that you do on a regular basis that you're like, oh, this is juice. This really juices me or my partner or my business or my team or myself. It could be any broad range of whatever it is. But just, is there something that comes to mind that's like juice for you that's like, I've solved this and I get so much fulfillment when I do this?
Yeah, it's this work. It's taken me a while to discover this work and to be brave enough to open up my own organization and to channel my expertise and my different sources of experience into what I do now. And it's definitely been a journey. I mean, most people who have been trained to be PhD sociologists do the pretty standard academic tenure track thing. And I didn't find that fulfilling. And leaving that world, my advisors were basically like, all right, well, good luck. You want to do applied work? Ew, like who wants to, that's beneath us. Good luck with that. And so there was really no set path for me in thinking about how I was going to direct my energy in a way that was really fulfilling. And it took me a good 5 or 6 years to find a path that really used my talents in a way that felt natural and like I'm home in what I'm intended to do. So that's where I am.
And on that, since I so loved your question. Scott and I are so similar, so we're both like yes. So with it, just curious because again, it sounds like you had this discovery of 5-6 years just give it out, and then this is it. Could you expand just a little bit deeper in, because it sounds like now you've built it, you have a team in place, you're doing the work, you're being the work, you're getting it. But could you maybe talk a little bit about finding what you thought would give you fulfillment and a little bit of the struggle? Because there's a lot of people I think that are like, I know what I'm meant for. And they, just like you were, they go, this is what I'm meant for. People are telling them it's not going to work, or they have fears or whatever comes up. And sometimes they jump in and start doing it and they don't get the immediate result and are like, it's not working. Yeah. I had this vision of like, as soon as I stepped into my legacy, because I know for me, that's what I thought. I'm like, as soon as I step into this and just start doing the work, it's like the gates are going to open and it's going to be so It's like, it's just as hard. It's just as difficult. And so I'm just curious, your path to say, I'm so fulfilled by this work, and maybe share some of the, I guess my question is some of the struggle that goes with that you're able to overcome, so that it's not a cakewalk, right? It's not like, oh my God, I'm so fulfilled that it's a cakewalk, but like, wow, I had to overcome these hurdles to get to here. If you're open to sharing that.
Oh man. I mean, it's definitely been a struggle. I mean, I would have to say, of course there's, the mental struggle of like the leap, I don't know for your listeners, but, because I had been working as a consultant within other organizations before, it's very easy for me to, someone says, hey, I would really, you have this skill in X, like, can you help me here? And I'd be like, okay, sure. Or you have this, and so I for a long time, I, was kind of scattered in what I was doing because I would take gigs that used one part of me, but I knew it didn't use all of me. And, and it's one thing to work for other organizations that if you're working for me, because I was working as a consultant within other organizations, I wasn't the person doing the biz dev. I was the person offering and delivering on the services. And so one of the things that was a real, just kind of, so once you do decide that you are going to do your own thing, like initially like, woo! And then you're like, holy shit. Like, now I'm not just the person who's like delivering the services now. Like I'm the person who's like, I'm doing all the marketing, all the PR, I'm doing all the relationship building, I'm doing all the content creation, and I'm delivering the services, and I'm doing the evaluation of the services. And it's, so it's, you need, even if you're not doing all those things yourself, and if you have other people helping you out, you still have to have a solid grasp of how those things should work in place with your company. And then there's, you could get a quick win with an awesome client and you're like, oh my God, amazing. And then I'm sure, kind of like the feast or famine roller coaster in the early days as well. And then there's just, there continues to be doubts of like, okay, so now I'm at this level, I can continue working at this level, but then there's this other company that's like, hey, Shannon, we would love for you to come internal and work for us. And you're like, oh, I don't know, like that's a steady paycheck. I don't know. Like it's even this, like, it's a constant struggle for me because what I'm discovering is that it really is an iterative journey. It's not linear at all. And what I love, though, about what I'm doing now is that I'm continuously learning. And I think the times when I doubted myself are the times when I nosedived. And it's, I think it's the ability to just have trust and faith, and couple that trust and faith with just a keen eye for what the business actually needs on a very practical level. It's not just all about like wishing for abundance or like faith that's not grounded in reality. And then also recognizing that your value actually will increase the more you do it. So that's something I've learned as well.
Thank you so much for that share. Except for some of the, specific examples or the specific topics, you could have described my path or Josh's path, or even a great many of, the listeners that have, either stepped onto their own or have stepped into a completely different industry. They don't want to be a lawyer anymore. Now they want to be in marketing, or they want to start their own business. And it's incredibly challenging. And like you said, it seems to be in ever-going evolvement. And I think it's not something you ever quite master, but it is something where you just start to become a little bit more comfortable with the, roller coaster of it. And, it's like you said, it's about really having that faith. And, for me, it was having the faith, having the belief, and then also having the kind of keen eye to bring in the resources to help me get stuff done, and then taking massive amounts of action and, just like really putting my feet to the ground and, checking in with myself. Is this working? Do I need to pivot? Do I need to go on path A, or do I need to go on path B? But, it's a real challenge that we see in so many of our listeners and in so many of our clients. So we really appreciate you, telling your story and, sharing all of your insights. And we really appreciate you coming onto the podcast. And, it's really funny because Shannon also has another endeavor called Epic Teams, and I was going back and forth to bring her on as an expert for teams. For Epic Couples. Sorry about that. She has another endeavor called Epic Couples, where she really helps, bring in fulfillment with couples, and that's something that we've talked about here on this podcast as well. And I kept going back and forth. It's like, okay, do we bring her or do we have her on here? So we'll definitely going to have to bring you in on another podcast. And we absolutely appreciate you sharing, your gifts, your insights, and everything else. Where can people learn a little bit more about you? How can people get in contact with you and all of that?
Yeah. www.epicteams.co is the best place to find me. You can email me directly at shannon@epicteams.co. And I'm in San Francisco. So if you're in the Bay, ring me up. Let's get coffee or tea, take a walk along the Embarcadero. I love learning about other people's journeys as well and being a part of this community.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much, Josh, and I absolutely appreciate you bringing your insights and your heart to Mastering Fulfillment, and we look forward to bringing you on in a later episode. Thank you so much.
Yeah. Cheers.
Visit us at masteringfulfillment.com for other podcasts such as these, or if you're looking to take your personal fulfillment to another level, feel free to get in contact with either myself or Joshua Warner.